Her name was Mira. At 23 years old, she had already learned that the world was not fair. It was not kind. And it certainly did not care about the dreams of a poor waitress from the wrong side of Manchester. Mira had grown up in a small flat above a laundromat. Her father was a kind but broken man who worked 2 jobs until his heart gave out when she was 16. Her mother followed a year later, not from illness, but from grief. Mira had no siblings, no rich uncles, no safety net. She had survived on instant noodles, second-hand uniforms, and the stubborn belief that hard work would eventually pay off. It didn't. By 23, Mira was working double shifts at a greasy spoon diner, sleeping 4 hours a night, and watching wealthy customers toss 100-pound notes at each other while she calculated how many meals she could afford with her tips. But Mira had one thing the wealthy didn't expect: a long memory. When she was 12 years old, her father had worked as a groundskeeper for the Ashworth family, one of the oldest, wealthiest dynasties in northern England. Lord Edmund Ashworth owned factories, estates, and half the politicians in the county. He also owned her father's contract, his hours, and his dignity. One winter, her father slipped on ice while clearing the Ashworth driveway. He broke his leg so badly that he could never do physical labor again. Lord Ashworth fired him the same day. No compensation, no apology, no pension, just a cold letter saying his services were no longer required. Her father never recovered, not just his leg, but his spirit. He spent the remaining 4 years of his life in pain, in poverty, and in silence. He never sued. He never spoke badly of the Ashworths. He simply died. But Mira had not forgotten, and now, 11 years later, she saw her chance. Lord Edmund Ashworth was dying. The great lion of British industry was 78 years old, confined to a wheelchair, and reportedly looking for a young wife to comfort him in his final years. The tabloids laughed. Society was disgusted, but Edmund didn't care. He had always taken whatever he wanted. When Mira saw the advertisement, discreet, private, offering generous financial arrangements for a young woman willing to provide companionship, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Revenge. She applied. She lied about her background, her education, her parents. She wore a borrowed dress and spoke with a polished accent she had practiced for weeks. Edmund's lawyers interviewed her. His doctors examined her. And somehow, impossibly, she was chosen. The plan was simple: marry Edmund, gain access to his fortune, then, on his deathbed, reveal who she really was, the daughter of the man he had discarded like trash. She would watch the horror in his eyes before he died. Then she would take her share of the inheritance and dissipate. But Mira had not accounted for 2 things. The first was Edmund's son. The second was her own heart. Julian Ashworth was 34 years old, and he looked like a man who had been dead for years but forgotten to stop breathing. He was tall, pale, with dark circles under his eyes and a permanent slouch in his shoulders. He rarely spoke. When he did, his voice was soft, hesitant, as if he expected to be punished for every word. He lived in a small cottage on the edge of the Ashworth estate, far from the main house, far from his father, far from everyone. Mira met him 3 days before the wedding. She was walking through the estate gardens, memorizing the layout, when she saw a man sitting alone on a stone bench, staring at a pond. He was thin, almost gaunt, wearing a rumpled sweater that looked 10 years old. His hands trembled slightly. "You must be Julian," Mira said. He flinched, as if he hadn't expected anyone to speak to him. "Yes, and you're the one marrying my father." "I'm Mira." "Mira." He said her name like he was tasting it. "That's a pretty name." "Thank you." Silence stretched between them. Mira should have walked away. She had a mission. She didn't have time for sympathy. But something about Julian made her stop. "Are you okay?" she asked. Julian laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "No one's asked me that in years." "Then I'm asking now." He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were gray, like winter clouds, and full of a pain so deep it seemed ancient. "My mother died when I was 12, he said quietly. "My father remarried a year later. She was cruel. He didn't care. I grew up in that house like a ghost, seen but not wanted. When I was 20, my stepmother accused me of something I didn't do. My father believed her. He locked me in the attic for 3 days without food. After that, I stopped trying to be human." Mira's throat tightened. "Julian, I'm not telling you this for pity. he interrupted. "I'm telling you so you understand. My father is not a good man. Whatever he promised you, money, security, safety, it's a lie. He will use you and discard you like he's done with everyone else." "Then why are you still here?" Mira asked. "Because I have nowhere else to go." He stood up, pulling his sweater tighter. "Welcome to the Ashworth family, Mira. I hope you survive it." He walked away before she could respond. The ceremony was small, cold, and joyless. Edmund sat in his wheelchair at the altar, looking like a withered bird in an expensive suit. Mira stood beside him in a white dress she didn't choose. Julian sat in the back row, alone. When the priest asked if anyone objected, Mira almost raised her own hand. But she didn't. She said, "I do." She signed the papers. She became Lady Ashworth. That night, Edmund did not touch her. He couldn't. His body was failing. Instead, he had her sit beside his bed while he talked about his will, his money, his legacy. He treated her like a piece of furniture with a pulse. Mira smiled, nodded, and plotted. But every morning, she saw Julian. In the garden, by the pond, in the library, where he read old books and never seemed to finish any of them. She started bringing him tea, then sandwiches, then conversations. Slowly, painfully, Julian began to open up. He told her about his stepmother, who had stolen his inheritance and manipulated his father. He told her about the accident that had left him with a permanent limp, falling down the stairs, he said. But his eyes said otherwise. He told her about the loneliness, the sleepless nights, the moments he had stood on the bridge over the river and wondered if anyone would miss him. Mira listened, and something dangerous began to grow inside her. Not revenge. Love. 3 months into the marriage, Edmund had a stroke. He was paralyzed on his left side, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. The doctors said he had weeks, maybe days. Mira stood at his bedside, ready to whisper her true identity into his ear, to watch his eyes widen with recognition and horror before he died. But Julian came into the room first. He was crying, silent, helpless tears. "Don't," Julian whispered. "Don't tell him. Please." Mira froze. "You know, I've known since the second week." Julian sat down heavily on a chair. "I found your father's employment records in the attic. I saw the termination letter. I know what my father did to your family. Then why didn't you stop me?" Julian looked at her with those gray, winter eyes. "Because I understand wanting revenge. I've wanted it every day for 20 years. But Mira," he reached out and took her hand, "revenge won't bring your father back. It won't heal you. It will only make you as empty as my father is." Mira felt tears burning her eyes. "I've worked so long for this. I've sacrificed everything." "I know." Julian stood up, still holding her hand. "So have I. But we don't have to be like them. We can choose something different." Edmund died 3 hours later. Mira never told him who she was. Edmund's will was read the following week. Mira expected nothing, or worse, a cruel joke. But Julian had hired a lawyer, fought his stepmother, and uncovered documents proving that Edmund had intended to leave everything to Julian and his new wife equally. Julian gave Mira half of everything. She could have walked away that day, rich, free, and finally safe. Instead, she stayed. "I don't want your money," she told Julian. "I want you." Julian looked at her like she had offered him the sun. "Mira, I'm broken. I'm damaged. I can't." "You're not broken," she interrupted. "You're wounded. There's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed. Wounded things just need time and love." He fell into her arms. They both cried. Mira and Julian did not live in the Ashworth mansion. They sold it. They donated most of the money to shelters, hospitals, and programs for abused children. They kept a small cottage by the sea, the same one Julian had lived in, the one he had thought was his prison. It became their home. Julian started painting again, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. Mira opened a small cafe in the nearby village, where she served coffee to fishermen and tourists and never charged anyone who couldn't pay. They had 2 children, a boy with Julian's gray eyes and a girl with Mira's stubborn chin. Years later, when someone asked Mira if she regretted not taking revenge on Edmund Ashworth, she smiled and said, "Revenge would have made me his prisoner. Love made me free." And Julian, sitting beside her with paint on his hands and peace in his eyes, kissed her forehead and whispered, "You saved me. You saved both of us.